A shy teacher was waiting for a blind date, until the two daughters of the Hells Angels said, "My father is late." Sarah adjusted the strap of her sensible, olive-green tote bag, the worn leather digging slightly into her shoulder. Her heart hammered a nervous rhythm against her ribs, a familiar sensation whenever she ventured beyond the carefully constructed routines of her life. She was early, of course. Being punctual was a deeply ingrained habit, a testament to her meticulous nature as a primary school teacher, and perhaps, a subtle manifestation of her anxiety. The cafe, named The Daily Grind, with a rather uninspired font, was bustling for a Tuesday evening. The aroma of freshly ground coffee beans mingled with the sweeter, more cloying scent of almond croissants, creating a comforting yet slightly overwhelming olfactory experience. She had chosen a small, somewhat secluded table by the window, hoping the fading daylight would soften the harshness of her self-scrutiny. She smoothed down the skirt of her floral dress, a rare departure from her usual muted palette of grays and navies, chosen specifically for this occasion. It was a blind date, suggested by Brenda, her well-meaning but often misguided colleague. "Sarah, you need to get out more. Mr. Henderson from accounting is lovely, I hear. Very stable." Stable. That was the word Brenda had used, and it had resonated with Sarah's quiet desire for predictability, for a life that didn't constantly throw curveballs. She was 34, and while she loved her job, loved the innocent curiosity of her 8-year-olds, her evenings often felt hollow, filled only with grading papers and rereading classic novels. The idea of a partner, a gentle, understanding presence, was appealing, if terrifying. She ordered a chamomile tea, hoping its soothing properties might extend beyond her throat to her churning stomach. Her hands, usually steady as she demonstrated long division or helped a child tie a stubborn shoelace, trembled slightly as she picked up the ceramic mug. She traced the rim with her thumb, her gaze drifting out the window to the street performers across the square. A mime, his face painted stark white, was attempting to interact with a group of teenagers, who mostly seemed amused rather than engaged. Sarah offered a small, sympathetic smile. She understood the struggle for connection, the effort required to bridge the gap between oneself and the world. Her date, Mr. Henderson, was supposed to arrive at 7. It was currently 6:52 p.m. She mentally rehearsed opening lines, rejecting each one as either too bland or too eager. "Hello, I'm Sarah." Too formal. "Hi, great to meet you." Too enthusiastic. She sighed, a barely audible puff of air. Perhaps she was simply not cut out for this. Her shyness, a lifelong companion, often felt like an invisible barrier, preventing her from truly blossoming. She saw other women in the cafe, laughing easily, engaged in lively conversations, their confidence radiating like warmth. She envied them, even as she admired them from a distance. The minutes ticked by, each one stretching longer than the last. 6:55, 6:58. She checked her phone, though she knew it was pointless. She hadn't exchanged numbers with Mr. Henderson, only a vague agreement to meet at this specific cafe. Brenda had insisted on the old-fashioned approach. Adds to the romance, Sarah. Romance felt a million miles away, replaced by a growing sense of awkwardness and the familiar sting of potential disappointment. She wondered if he would recognize her from the brief, slightly blurry photo Brenda had shown her. She hoped he wouldn't judge her too harshly. Her hair, a practical brown, was tied back in a neat ponytail, and her glasses, though fashionable, still lent her an air of studiousness. By 7:05, a faint blush had crept up her neck. She considered ordering a small pastry, just to appear less like someone waiting for a phantom. Yet, the thought of eating alone, surrounded by couples and groups, felt too vulnerable. She took another sip of her tea, now lukewarm, the comforting warmth having dissipated. She tried to convince herself that a few minutes' lateness was acceptable, perhaps even a sign of a busy, important man. But the small, nagging voice of insecurity, always present, began to whisper its familiar doubts. Had he forgotten? Had he seen her from outside and decided against it? Her imagination, usually reserved for crafting engaging stories for her students, conjured up various scenarios, each more deflating than the last. She was about to pull out a small paperback from her bag, a distraction, when a slight commotion near the entrance caught her eye. Two young girls, no older than her own students, stood hesitantly just inside the door, their eyes scanning the crowded room. They looked remarkably alike, with long, dark hair braided neatly down their backs, and bright, piercing blue eyes that seemed to take in everything. They were dressed in matching denim jackets adorned with an assortment of colorful, hand-stitched patches, a rainbow, a smiling sun, a small, intricate depiction of a motorcycle. This last detail, though small, registered subconsciously as unusual. Their clothing, while clean, had a slightly rugged, lived-in quality, and their small, sturdy boots seemed more suited for an adventure than a cafe visit. Sarah watched them, her teacher's instinct kicking in. They looked a little lost, perhaps waiting for their parents. She wondered if she should offer assistance, but then her gaze met one of the girl's eyes, and the girl, with surprising directness, began to walk towards her table, her twin following closely behind. Sarah felt a peculiar mix of curiosity and mild alarm. Had she seen them before? They certainly weren't students from her school. The girls stopped a few feet from her table, their expressions serious, almost solemn. They were small for 8-year-olds, but their posture was surprisingly composed. The one who had led the way, her blue eyes fixed on Sarah, spoke first, her voice clear and surprisingly mature for her age, though tinged with a faint, almost imperceptible lisp. "Excuse me, are you Sarah?" Sarah blinked, taken aback. "Yes, I am," she managed, her voice a little breathy. She glanced around, wondering if their parents were nearby, perhaps playing a trick. The second girl, equally serious, stepped forward slightly. "Our father is late, please forgive him." Sarah's eyebrows furrowed in confusion. "Your father?" she repeated, a dawning realization, both bewildering and unsettling, beginning to form in her mind. Could these be Mr. Henderson's daughters? But Brenda hadn't mentioned children. And why would they be here alone? The first girl nodded, her gaze unwavering. "Yes. He sent us ahead. He said he has a situation." She paused, as if searching for the right word, then added, "He really wants to meet you." Sarah's mind reeled. A blind date with children as emissaries? This was certainly not the stable introduction Brenda had promised. Before she could formulate a response, before she could even process the full absurdity of the situation, the second girl, her voice a soft, earnest whisper, uttered words that would forever etch themselves into Sarah's memory, words that changed the very fabric of her carefully ordered world. "We really want a mother." The simple, heartfelt plea hung in the air, a fragile, unexpected bomb dropped into the quiet cafe. Sarah stared at the two identical faces, their blue eyes wide and hopeful, and felt a jolt of something she couldn't quite name, a mixture of profound shock, a strange sense of protective instinct, and a growing, icy tendril of fear. The patches on their jackets, the rugged boots, the unusual confidence of their approach, suddenly, they all coalesced into a disturbing, coherent image. Her mind, usually so logical and structured, struggled to reconcile the innocent faces before her with the implications of their presence, and the unspoken, yet palpable, weight of their father's absence. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken questions and the sudden, terrifying realization that her uneventful Tuesday evening had just taken a turn she could never have anticipated. The mime outside continued his silent performance, oblivious to the quiet drama unfolding within the cafe, a drama that felt less like a blind date and more like the beginning of an entirely different story. The simple, heartfelt plea hung in the air, a fragile, unexpected bomb dropped into the quiet cafe. Sarah stared at the two identical faces, their blue eyes wide and hopeful, and felt a jolt of something she couldn't quite name, a mixture of profound shock, a strange sense of protective instinct, and a growing, icy tendril of fear. The patches on their jackets, the rugged boots, the unusual confidence of their approach, suddenly, they all coalesced into a disturbing, coherent image. Her mind, usually so logical and structured, struggled to reconcile the innocent faces before her with the implications of their presence, and the unspoken, yet palpable, weight of their father's absence. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken questions and the sudden, terrifying realization that her uneventful Tuesday evening had just taken a turn she could never have anticipated. The mime outside continued his silent performance, oblivious to the quiet drama unfolding within the cafe, a drama that felt less like a blind date and more like the beginning of an entirely different story. Sarah's throat felt dry, a sudden desert. She swallowed, trying to find her voice, to construct a response that was both gentle and practical. Her teacher's training, honed over years of dealing with everything from scraped knees to playground squabbles, kicked in, albeit shakily. She instinctively knew these children weren't just delivering a message, they were expressing a deep, unspoken need. A mother, she finally managed, the word feeling foreign on her tongue in this context. She looked from one girl to the other, trying to ascertain which one had spoken, but their expressions were mirror images of earnest hope. "Please, sit down," she offered, gesturing to the empty chairs at her small table. "Would you like something to drink? A juice, perhaps?" The mundane offer felt ridiculously out of place, yet it was the only anchor she could grasp in the swirling chaos of her thoughts. The girls exchanged a quick glance, a silent communication passing between them, before the first girl, the one who had initially approached, nodded. "Thank you. We would like water, please." Her politeness was impeccable, almost unnerving in its formality. They moved with a synchronized grace, sliding onto the chairs opposite Sarah, their small boots barely touching the ground. They sat upright, hands folded neatly in their laps, like well-behaved pupils awaiting instruction. Sarah, still reeling, flagged down a passing waitress, ordering 2 waters and, on a sudden impulse, 2 almond croissants, hoping the sweet treat might offer some comfort, some normalcy to this surreal encounter. She needed a moment to collect her thoughts, to process the implications of what was happening. "So," Sarah began, her voice still a little shaky, "your father, he sent you here to meet me?" She tried to keep her tone even, inquisitive rather than accusatory. Her mind raced, sifting through the limited information. Brenda, stable Mr. Henderson, a blind date. Now, 2 children, a situation, and a plea for a mother. It was a bizarre, disjointed puzzle. She found herself scrutinizing the girls more closely. The motorcycle patch on their jackets. It wasn't just a generic cartoon bike, it was detailed, almost realistic, a cruiser model, polished chrome glinting even in the stitched thread. And their eyes, those piercing blue eyes held a depth that belied their years, a hint of resilience, perhaps even hardship. The second girl, whose voice was softer, answered this time. "Yes. He said you would be here. He said you were waiting for him." She spoke with a quiet certainty, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. "He told us to tell you he was sorry for being late. He had to sort something out." "Sort something out?" Sarah echoed, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. The phrase felt ominous, hinting at something far removed from the mundane world of accounting or primary school. She imagined Mr. Henderson, perhaps stuck in traffic or delayed by an unexpected work emergency. But the girls' delivery, their serious demeanor, and the previous mention of a situation painted a different picture. "What kind of situation?" she ventured, trying to sound casual, though her heart was pounding. The first girl shifted slightly in her seat, her gaze unwavering. "Just a situation. Grown-up stuff. He said it wouldn't take long." There was a subtle evasiveness in her tone, a practiced discretion that made Sarah even more uneasy. It wasn't the innocent vagueness of a child who simply didn't understand, it was the guardedness of one who knew not to reveal too much. Sarah, the teacher, recognized the signs of a child who had learned to navigate a complex adult world. The waitress arrived with the waters and croissants. The girls thanked her politely before turning their attention back to Sarah. They each took a delicate sip of water, then carefully unwrapped their croissants. They didn't devour them with the typical gusto of children their age, instead, they ate with a quiet, almost reserved enjoyment. Sarah watched them, her initial fear momentarily softened by a wave of pity. Whatever their situation was, these children were clearly well-drilled, perhaps in survival, in presenting a composed front. "Brenda didn't mention you had children," Sarah said, more to herself than to the girls, her voice barely a whisper. The thought of Brenda, so well-meaning and so entirely wrong, brought a flicker of exasperation. Brenda's stable Mr. Henderson was turning out to be anything but. "She doesn't know about us," the second girl stated simply, her blue eyes meeting Sarah's. "Only people who need to know, know." That cryptic statement sent another shiver down Sarah's spine. Only people who need to know. What kind of life did these children lead where their existence was a secret, their presence carefully managed? The image of the motorcycle patch flashed in her mind again, followed by the rugged, lived-in quality of their clothes, the sturdy boots. A sudden, terrifying possibility began to coalesce in her mind, a whisper of a world she only knew from sensationalized news reports or gritty crime dramas. It was a world of outsiders, of strict codes and loyalties, a world far removed from her carefully curated existence of lesson plans and parent-teacher conferences. "And you really want a mother?" Sarah asked again, her voice softer this time, laced with a genuine ache. She couldn't ignore the raw vulnerability in their earlier plea. The first girl nodded, her eyes earnest. "Yes. Our father is very busy. He tries, but we want someone who is always there. Someone to read us stories, and help with our homework, and make us hot chocolate when it's cold." Her voice held a poignant longing, a list of simple, domestic desires that twisted Sarah's heart. "He said you were a teacher. He said you were kind. He told you I was kind." Sarah felt a blush creep up her neck. This Mr. Henderson had clearly done some research, or Brenda had provided a rather detailed dossier. The thought of him scrutinizing her, describing her to his children, felt intensely personal, and yet, deeply unsettling given the circumstances. How did he know that? "He knows things," the second girl said, a slight shrug of her small shoulders, as if it were obvious. "He knows a lot of things about everyone." This was not that stable Mr. Henderson from accounting. This was someone else entirely. Someone with connections, with an ability to gather information, someone who sent his children as emissaries to a blind date with a plea for a mother. Sarah's teacher's instinct, usually a compass for guiding young minds, was now pointing wildly in every direction. Her anxiety, a constant companion, was now screaming at a fever pitch. Her desire for predictability was being trampled underfoot by the most unpredictable situation of her life. She looked at the girls. They were so small, so composed, yet so clearly carrying a burden. She saw their neat braids, their clean clothes, a testament to someone's care, likely their father's. Despite the alarming implications of their presence, Sarah couldn't help but feel a pull towards them, a maternal instinct stirring within her that she rarely allowed herself to acknowledge. They were children, in need, and she was a teacher. It was her nature to protect, to nurture. But the fear was a strong countercurrent. What kind of man was their father? What was this situation? And what would it mean if she, Sarah, a shy, quiet primary school teacher, were to step into their world? The cafe continued its gentle hum around them, a stark contrast to the internal turmoil raging within Sarah. Couples laughed, friends chatted, the barista called out orders. No one seemed to notice the unusual tableau at her table, a nervous woman and two extraordinarily poised children with an unspoken agenda. Sarah felt a desperate need to escape, to run back to the safety of her quiet apartment, her classic novels, her predictable life. But she couldn't. Not with those two pairs of hopeful blue eyes fixed on her. "So, what are your names?" Sarah asked, trying to steer the conversation towards something more grounded, more appropriate for children. She needed to know who they were, these small, powerful agents of chaos. "I'm Lily," said the first girl, offering a small, polite smile that softened the seriousness of her features. "And I'm Daisy," said the second, her voice a little softer, a little shyer than her sister's, but still direct. Lily and Daisy. Flower names, so innocent, so at odds with the rugged boots and the motorcycle patch. Sarah tried to imagine them in her classroom, sitting quietly, absorbing lessons, their hands raised politely. It was a comforting image, a familiar one. But the reality of their current situation, the unknown father, that situation, the plea for a mother, kept pulling her back to a darker, more dangerous landscape. "It's nice to meet you, Lily and Daisy," Sarah said, trying to infuse warmth into her voice. "But, this is a blind date. I was expecting to meet your father, Mr. Henderson, alone." She tried to articulate her confusion, her boundaries, without sounding harsh or rejecting. She was talking to children, after all. Lily's expression remained serious. "He knows. He said it would be better this way. So you could see us. See what we need. Her gaze was direct, unwavering, a challenge and an appeal rolled into one. Daisy nodded in agreement, her small hand reaching out instinctively to touch her sister's arm, a small gesture of solidarity. Sarah felt a wave of indignation, quickly followed by a deeper tremor of fear. Better this way, to ambush her with his children, to put them in the position of making such a vulnerable, monumental request? It felt manipulative, unfair. And yet, the raw honesty of Lily's words, "See what we need," cut through her anger. These children weren't pawns, they were active participants, desperate for something their father, for all his mysterious power and connections, couldn't provide alone. "Our mother, she left a long time ago," Daisy whispered, her voice barely audible, her blue eyes clouding slightly. "She didn't like our father's friends. Or his work." This was it. The first real crack in their composed facade, the first glimpse into the reality of their lives. His friends? His work? Sarah pressed gently, her teacher's curiosity overriding her fear for a moment. She needed to understand. Lily sighed, a small, world-weary sound that was too old for her 8 years. "He has a club. A motorcycle club. They're like family. But they're loud. And sometimes they have arguments. And our mother, she just wanted quiet. A motorcycle club. Loud. Arguments." The pieces were falling into place, chillingly. The patches, the boots, that situation, the father who knows things. Sarah's mind screamed the word she hadn't dared to articulate, Hell's Angels. The title Brenda had given, Mr. Henderson from accounting, now seemed like a cruel joke, a veil of respectability thinly stretched over a far more perilous truth. She pictured burly men in leather, the roar of engines, a world of danger and unpredictability. It was the antithesis of everything Sarah valued, everything she sought in life. Her chamomile tea, now cold, sat forgotten. Her stomach churned, not just with anxiety, but with a new, potent mix of dread and a strangely compelling sense of responsibility. These children, Lily and Daisy, were sitting right in front of her, their eyes fixed on her with a desperate hope that felt like a physical weight. They weren't asking for a playdate, they were asking for a fundamental shift in their world, and by extension, in hers. "Does your father know you're telling me this?" Sarah asked, her voice hushed. She felt a sudden, irrational fear that the walls had ears, that someone might be listening, judging. Lily and Daisy exchanged another glance, a quick, silent consultation. "He said to tell you the truth," Lily said, her voice dropping slightly, "if you asked. He said you were smart. And you would understand." Understand what? Sarah thought, a frantic edge to her internal monologue. Understand that her blind date was with a man from a notorious motorcycle club? Understand that his children, clearly neglected in some fundamental emotional way despite their outward composure, were seeking a mother figure in a woman they had just met? Understand that her carefully constructed world was about to be obliterated by a man who sent his children to do his bidding? The cafe door chimed again, drawing Sarah's gaze. A man stood framed in the entrance, a silhouette against the fading evening light. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a presence that seemed to absorb all the ambient chatter. He wasn't wearing a suit, or anything remotely resembling what an accountant might wear. Instead, he was clad in dark, worn denim and leather, a heavy, intricate silver ring glinting on one of his fingers as he pushed the door fully open. His hair was dark, pulled back from a rugged, strong-jawed face, and his eyes, even from a distance, seemed to possess a piercing intensity. A faint, almost imperceptible murmur rippled through the cafe as a few heads turned, then quickly turned away, as if accustomed to his presence but wary of direct eye contact. He scanned the room, his gaze moving slowly, deliberately, until it landed on Sarah's table, on the two small figures sitting opposite her. A slow, knowing smile, not entirely kind, spread across his lips. He began to walk towards them, his stride powerful, unhurried, each step radiating an undeniable authority. Lily and Daisy straightened in their seats, their faces lighting up with a mixture of relief and anticipation. Sarah felt a cold wave wash over her, a premonition of monumental change. This was him. This was Mr. Henderson. And he was certainly not from accounting. That situation was about to arrive, a storm brewing on the horizon of her quiet, predictable life, and Sarah, the shy teacher, was caught directly in its path. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the impending roar. He reached their table, his presence a magnetic force that pulled all attention, whether acknowledged or not. He wasn't Mr. Henderson from accounting, he was a force of nature, rugged and unyielding. His eyes, the same piercing blue as his daughter's, met Sarah's, holding a challenging intensity that both unnerved and captivated her. He had a faint scar above his left eyebrow, a testament to a life far removed from spreadsheets and quarterly reports. "Papa!" Lily and Daisy exclaimed in unison, their faces breaking into genuine, unreserved smiles that melted away their earlier solemnity. They scrambled off their chairs, throwing their small arms around his legs. He leaned down, a rare, softer smile gracing his lips as he ruffled their hair, a gesture of affection that momentarily disarmed Sarah. He straightened, his gaze returning to Sarah, a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher in his eyes, amusement, assessment, perhaps even a hint of respect. "Sarah, I presume," he said, his voice a low rumble, surprisingly smooth, yet carrying an undeniable edge of authority. "I apologize for my tardiness. Things came up." He didn't offer a hand, nor did he introduce himself as Mr. Henderson. He simply stood, a powerful, immovable object in the bustling cafe. Sarah swallowed, her throat still dry. "Yes, I'm Sarah," she managed, her voice barely a whisper against the sudden roar in her ears. She felt acutely aware of her sensible dress, her neat ponytail, her chamomile tea. She was a bird facing a lion, a sheltered garden flower confronting a storm. "And these are Lily and Daisy." Her voice held a note of bewilderment. "My daughters," he confirmed, his eyes glinting. He pulled out the empty chair opposite Sarah, settling into it with an ease that suggested he owned the space. The chair groaned slightly under his weight, a stark contrast to Sarah's delicate handling of her own. "They've already explained the situation, I take it." Sarah's gaze flickered between him and the girls, who had now settled back into their seats, watching the exchange with an almost unnerving attentiveness. They mentioned that situation," Sarah replied, choosing her words carefully. "And that you were late because you had to sort something out." She paused, then, drawing on a wellspring of courage she hadn't known she possessed, she met his gaze directly. "They also mentioned a motorcycle club. And that their mother left because of your friends, and at work." A muscle twitched in his jaw, but his expression remained largely unreadable. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his broad chest. "They are remarkably honest," he said, a hint of pride in his voice. "And yes, they speak the truth. My name is Jax. Jax Teller. Jax. Not Mr. Henderson." The full weight of the deception, and the terrifying reality, crashed over Sarah. Hell's Angels. Jax Teller. The name resonated with a raw, dangerous authenticity that Brenda's, Mr. Henderson from accounting, could never have conveyed. "Jax," Sarah repeated, testing the name. It felt foreign, dangerous, on her tongue. "And Brenda, she told me you were Mr. Henderson from accounting." He offered a short, humorless chuckle. "Brenda is a well-meaning woman. And easily persuaded." Mr. Henderson from accounting seemed a more palatable introduction for a blind date. "Especially for someone like you." His eyes, those piercing blue eyes, seemed to strip away her carefully constructed defenses, seeing the shy teacher beneath. "My apologies for the subterfuge. It was necessary. Given what I was hoping for." "And what exactly were you hoping for, Jax?" Sarah asked, her voice gaining a surprising firmness. Her fear was still present, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now mingled with a growing sense of indignation and a strange, almost defiant curiosity. She had been ambushed, deceived, and now she was facing a man whose world was utterly alien to hers. Yet, she couldn't tear her eyes away from the hopeful faces of Lily and Daisy. Jax's gaze softened almost imperceptibly as he looked at his daughters. "I was hoping for someone to be a mother to these two. Someone kind. Someone stable. Someone who understands children. Brenda said you were all those things. He looked back at Sarah, his expression serious. My life isn't easy, Sarah. It's not quiet. And it's not always safe. Their mother couldn't handle it. She left. And I'm not built for domesticity. I try. But they need more than I can give them. They need a mother. The raw honesty in his confession, the stark admission of his limitations, chipped away at Sarah's anger. She saw the burden he carried, the desperation beneath the hard exterior. And she saw the longing in his daughter's eyes. So you sent them to me, Sarah said, her voice softer now, tinged with a complex mix of emotions. To ask for a mother. It was their idea, Jax clarified, a slight frown on his brow. They overheard me talking to a trusted friend about finding someone. They insisted they come. Said they needed to interview you. He paused, a flicker of something that might have been embarrassment crossing his face. I thought it was a terrible idea. But they can be persuasive. Lily and Daisy nodded in solemn agreement, their blue eyes wide and earnest. We really want a mother, Daisy whispered again, her voice a soft, heartfelt plea that echoed in Sarah's heart. Sarah looked at the two girls, then back at Jax. Her mind reeled. This was not just a blind date gone wrong, it was an existential crisis. Her world, so carefully ordered and predictable, was being asked to collide with a world of leather, roaring engines, and unspoken dangers. Her anxieties screamed at her to run, to politely decline, to retreat to the safety of her quiet life. But then she remembered the mime outside, struggling for connection, the effort required to bridge the gap between oneself and the world. She understood that struggle. And in Lily and Daisy's eyes, she saw a profound need, a yearning for the very stability and kindness that Brenda had described her as possessing. Jax, Sarah began, her voice gaining strength, I'm a primary school teacher. My life is quiet. Predictable. I teach 8-year-olds long division and how to tie their shoelaces. Your world, from what I gather, is anything but. She paused, taking a deep breath. I don't know anything about motorcycle clubs. Or situations that keep you from a blind date. He listened patiently, his gaze unwavering, allowing her to speak her truth. I understand, he said simply when she finished. I wouldn't ask you to step into my world blindly. But I also wouldn't ask you to be something you're not. They don't need a biker queen, Sarah. They need a teacher. A kind, stable woman who can read them stories and help with their homework and make them hot chocolate. His voice held a surprising tenderness when he spoke of his daughter's needs. And I need someone who can bring that into their lives. Sarah looked at the half-eaten croissants, the lukewarm chamomile tea. This was not a date. This was an invitation to a life she could barely comprehend. But she also saw the genuine need, the raw vulnerability in the girls' faces, and the unexpected, almost desperate plea in Jax's eyes. Her teacher's instinct, her deeply ingrained desire to nurture and protect, warred with her lifelong shyness and fear of the unknown. What was the situation that kept you? Sarah asked, needing to understand, needing to gauge the true nature of the world she was being asked to consider. Jax hesitated for a moment, then sighed. A rival club. A misunderstanding over territory. No violence, thankfully. Just a lot of shouting and posturing. I had to mediate. Ensure things didn't escalate. It's part of the job. He spoke with a weary resignation, not pride. It was a glimpse into the constant tension of his life, a life where misunderstandings could quickly turn deadly. Sarah felt a cold dread, but also a strange clarity. This was his reality. And by extension, it would be theirs, if she chose to step into it. She imagined her colleagues' faces, Brenda's shock, her quiet apartment suddenly filled with the roar of engines and the presence of a man like Jax Teller. It was terrifying. But then she looked at Lily and Daisy, their small, hopeful faces, their innocent plea. They weren't asking for her to become a Hell's Angel. They were asking for a mother. I can't promise to be a mother to them right now, Jax, Sarah said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. She had to be honest, both with him and with herself. That's a monumental commitment. One I wouldn't take lightly. Especially not after a blind date, or through emissaries. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips as she looked at the girls. But I can see they need someone. And I care about children. Jax watched her, his expression unreadable, waiting. What I can offer, Sarah continued, surprising herself with her own resolve, is to get to know them. To spend time with them. To see if there's a connection. To see if I can be the kind of presence they need in their lives. And to see if I can understand your world, even a little. She knew it was a huge step, a terrifying leap into the unknown. But the alternative, turning away from these two hopeful faces, felt even worse. A slow smile spread across Jax's face, a genuine smile this time, lighting up his intense blue eyes. It transformed his rugged features, making him seem both dangerous and undeniably charismatic. That's all I can ask for, Sarah, he said, his voice softer now, almost gentle. A chance. For them. And for you to see that my world, while complicated, isn't without its own kind of loyalty and family. He glanced at Lily and Daisy, who were now beaming, their earlier solemnity completely gone. Does this mean we get to have hot chocolate? Daisy asked, her voice filled with an 8-year-old's practical hope, her face alight. Sarah chuckled, a genuine, unforced sound that surprised even herself. The sound of her own laughter felt foreign, yet liberating. Perhaps, she said, looking at Daisy, then at Lily. Perhaps we can start with hot chocolate. And some stories. She met Jax's gaze again. But I have some conditions. No more blind dates with children as emissaries. And next time, you introduce yourself properly. Jax laughed, a deep, rumbling sound that filled the small corner of the cafe. It was a sound of relief and something else, something that hinted at a new, unexpected possibility. Agreed, he said, extending a hand across the table, his large, calloused fingers wrapping firmly around her trembling ones. His grip was strong, warm, and surprisingly comforting. Jax Teller. It's a pleasure to meet you, Sarah. Sarah felt a jolt, an electric current passing between them. Her world hadn't just taken a turn, it had been completely upended. The shy teacher, who sought predictability and stability, had just agreed to step into the tumultuous, dangerous, yet undeniably compelling world of Jax Teller and his two hopeful daughters. She still didn't know if she could be their mother, or if she could navigate the complexities of his life. But for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt a flicker of something beyond anxiety and routine. She felt a spark of adventure, a nascent sense of purpose, and a terrifying, exhilarating hope. The mime outside continued his silent performance, an oblivious backdrop to the quiet drama that had just ended one story and begun another, far more extraordinary one. Sarah, the shy teacher, had just found herself on the cusp of a life she never knew she wanted, a life where the roar of engines might just be accompanied by the laughter of children, and the comforting scent of hot chocolate.